I remember the house, not by its walls or roof, but by the things it held the quiet witnesses to our daily rhythm. They were not grand or expensive, not cataloged or curated, but they formed the architecture of memory. A rotary phone on a side table, its cord always tangled. The smell of coffee from a percolator just before dawn. The soft hum of a Frigidaire as it kept leftovers and milk bottles cold. That house, our house, was a living museum of the 1950s, not the kind with velvet ropes and plaques, but the kind where time moved slower and every object had a soul. Each room whispered stories. Every drawer held a secret. Even the floorboards creaked in familiar patterns. Now, decades later, when I close my eyes, I don't see the house. I feel it. I hear the tick of the sunburst clock. I run my hand across the plastic cover of our family Bible. I hear my mother humming in the kitchen as the pressure cooker hissed. This is not just a list of objects. This is a letter to a time, a love song, to the unspoken poetry of a household that shaped us all. Come with me. Let's open the front door together and step back into the warmth of 1950s America, one object, one memory at a time. Before you even stepped inside our home, the porch told you who we were. It wasn't a grand porch. No sweeping staircase, no marble pillars. Just wood, aged and painted white, every other summer, by my father's steady hand. The boards creaked under weight, especially near the second step, where the wood had begun to sink just a little. We never fixed it. We liked how it complained. There was a porch swing hanging from two rust-kissed chains. It swayed on its own when the wind was right, and when my sister and I sat on it side by side, it creaked with each pass, like an old rocking chair whispering bedtime stories. We spent entire evenings there, bare feet brushing the planks, watching the world pass by slower than it ever does today. In one corner stood a metal milk box, silver and dented, where fresh bottles would appear each morning like magic. The milkman. Mr. Gilroy wore a white cap and always nodded silently toward the porch before disappearing back into his truck. Even now, when I see a glass bottle, I remember that soft clink of milk against metal. A welcome mat lay in front of the screen door, its coir fibers worn thin from years of shoes wiping off summer dust and winter snow. My mother once replaced it with a newer one from Woolworth's, but none of us liked it. She brought the old one back within the week. And oh, that screen door, how it slapped. It had no patience for politeness. You could try to close it gently, but the spring always snapped it shut with a clap that echoed down the street. Every neighbor knew when someone had entered or exited the house. It was our doorbell and our dinner call all in one. Perched on a shelf by the door sat a small ceramic frog chipped at the corner of its smile. It was a gift from my aunt in 1952. Supposed to bring good luck, but we mostly used it to hold coins chalk for hopscotch, and sometimes fireflies caught in jelly jars. There were ashtrays, 2 glass, and heavy set on the ledge near Dad's chair. He'd sit there after dinner, shirt sleeves rolled radio, humming low behind the screen door, puffing a Lucky Strike, and talking about the Dodgers. The smoke curled into the night like the last words of a story not quite finished. Sometimes neighborhood kids would gather near the steps. The porch was our lighthouse, our judge's bench, our clubhouse, our stage. I remember one summer evening in '55 when Lucy Myers performed a tap dance routine on the third step. We clapped like it was Broadway. On Sundays, Grandma would sit there with her crochet needles, murmuring to herself as the patterns grew under her fingers. She wore a shawl even in warm weather and swore the swing helped her remember. And in the quiet hours, when the day had finished its breath and the world slowed, the porch took on a glow of its own. The amber porch light would flicker. Moths would circle like tiny dancers, and the wood beneath us would still be warm from the sun. It was the threshold of our lives, not just a space before the home, but a part of it, a memory keeper, a silent greeter, a farewell giver. To this day, when I see a porch swing or hear the slap of a screen door, I don't just think of wood and chain. I think of laughter, of dusty shoes, of evening breezes, and the taste of root beer floats on the tongue. The porch wasn't just where we waited, it was where we were. If the porch was the soul of our home, then the living room was its heartbeat. Every evening we returned to it, sometimes tired, sometimes jubilant, but always together. The sofa sat like a silent sentinel along the back wall. It was upholstered in a scratchy greenish tweed fabric that left cross-hatched imprints on your skin if you sat too long in shorts. At either end were thick wooden armrests, smooth from years of elbows and casual drumming fingers. My mother would vacuum it weekly and fluff the cushions, though their shape was long since gone. We didn't care. That sag in the middle was where we fit best three kids on top of each other during Saturday morning cartoons. Just behind it, hanging above our heads, was a sunburst clock, gold radiant ticking like a quiet metronome that kept the tempo of our lives. Its 12 wooden rays reached outward like a permanent sunrise on the wall. I used to stare at it for minutes at a time, watching the thin black hand creep forward while Dad read the paper and Mom darned socks nearby. The coffee table was low and oval, its surface protected by lace doilies and thick glass ashtrays that sparkled like crystal under the ceiling light. We never used coasters, just slid our iced tea glasses across the polished wood and left a ring as proof we were there. Beneath it was a stack of Life magazines, their corners curled, and a few issues of Popular Mechanics with dog-eared pages Dad had marked. In the far corner stood the crown jewel, our television. It was a Zenith, black and white, encased in dark walnut veneer with two thick dials that clicked audibly with each turn. Channels were limited, and the image sometimes wavered with ghostly doubles, but it was ours. My father would adjust the rabbit ear antenna by twisting foil around the tips, then instruct one of us to hold it right there while the picture steadied. We watched I Love Lucy Dragnet and The Ed Sullivan Show with breathless attention. It wasn't just entertainment, it was ceremony. Sometimes during reruns, I would lie on the shag carpet, fingers tracing patterns in the long fibers. It was burnt orange, thick as grass, and held the scent of furniture polish and time. You could lose things in that rug marble's button secrets. In the evenings, we'd pull out the TV trays, metal folding tables, decorated with stars or floral patterns. Mom would bring out our dinner plates, meatloaf peas, mashed potatoes with a pat of butter melting into a golden pool. We'd eat right there, knees tucked, eyes fixed on the screen. Conversation paused for 22 commercial-free minutes. In one corner sat our record player, housed in a wood cabinet with sliding doors. You had to open it gently, one side for LPs, the other for 45s. My brother would sneak on Elvis when Dad wasn't home. Mom preferred Nat King Cole. On Sundays, we'd hear Perry Como hum through the afternoon like a lullaby. The vinyl records crackled as the needle found its groove, and sometimes we danced barefoot in the middle of the floor just because. There were curtains too thick floral and sun-faded drawn closed during hot afternoons to keep the room cool. Their folds held dust motes that danced in the sunlight, and when pulled aside, they revealed the street below and the old oak tree that watched over us like a kindly neighbor. And of course, the lamp. Brass stem scalloped shade, a pull chain that clicked once to bring the room alive. The light was warm yellow, forgiving. It bathed the room in softness that made even arguments feel smaller. But the living room wasn't just about objects. It was where my father fell asleep, with the newspaper folded over his chest, where Mom embroidered names onto baby bibs, where we sat in silence when the dog ran away, where we waited for phone calls that never came, where we laughed until we couldn't breathe during Christmas charades. It was where I first saw my grandfather cry during the Kennedy election, where I held my little sister's hand after her tonsil surgery, where my brother showed me how to tie a tie using Dad's old clip-on as a joke. The living room you see wasn't just a room. It was the story of us, framed in fabric, furnished with memory. And long after the chairs were gone and the carpet replaced, I could still close my eyes and hear the faint hum of the Zenith, the clink of ice in Dad's glass, the whisper of a page turning, and know I was home. The kitchen was more than just a place to cook. It was a womb of warmth, a space where days began and hearts softened. Each morning began the same. My mother would step onto the linoleum floor, its checkered pattern worn thin in the spots where she stood most near the stove beside the sink in front of the counter. It squeaked slightly under her slippers, and I grew to love that sound. It meant life was stirring. In the corner stood the mighty Frigidaire, rounded at the top with a chrome handle that clicked with satisfying weight. It hummed softly like a cat asleep. Inside were milk bottles delivered just hours earlier, butter wrapped in wax paper, leftover meatloaf from Sunday, and if we were lucky, slices of cold cherry pie. Next to it, always hot, always humming, was the percolator, a squat metal pot with a glass knob at the top. It hissed and gurgled each morning as my mother prepared coffee for Dad. That sound was the pulse of the house, low, patient, constant. She'd pour it into thick ceramic mugs, one green and one yellow, and stir in cream with a long-handled spoon that clinked against the sides like music. Above the stove hung a metal spice rack filled with dusty glass jars of nutmeg, cinnamon, cloves, and something called mace that we never used. The oven beneath it had knobs like radio dials, and its door groaned when opened. I still remember the scent of biscuits rising, of ham baking, of birthday cakes browning slowly behind that little glass window. There was no timer. Mom didn't need one. She listened. She knew. On the Formica counter, edged in aluminum, sat a bread box painted robin's egg blue. It held loaves of white bread in wax paper sleeves, sometimes with raisins or swirls of cinnamon, if the grocer had a deal. Next to it was a toaster, gleaming chrome, always warm. You had to keep an eye on it. It popped fast and hot, and if you weren't careful, the toast came out with edges black as a tire. The cabinets above were filled with Pyrex bowls, floral-patterned mixing dishes, and Tupperware in faded pastel tones, each with lids that never seemed to match. Mom had a favorite rolling pin worn smooth in the center, its handles chipped red. When she used it, flour dust would hang in the air like mist, and the whole kitchen smelled like holidays. At the table round with a metal rim and 4 vinyl chairs, we ate together. No phones, no distractions, just forks tapping on melamine plates, conversations about school, and stories Dad told between bites. We passed butter in a glass dish, shared jelly from a jar with a gingham lid, and used napkins embroidered with tiny flowers. And when guests came over, Mom would make Jell-O, not the quick kind, but the layered masterpiece with green on the bottom, red in the middle, and whipped cream on top. She'd serve it in tall glass dessert cups that clinked when we toasted to birthdays and first communions. There was a radio on the windowsill, small square, with gold dials and a cloth speaker cover. It played softly during the day. Perry Como in the morning weather reports at noon. Paul Harvey in the afternoon. It spoke to us while dishes clinked in the sink and curtains fluttered in the breeze. On the wall hung a wooden clock shaped like a rooster, its second hand clicking forward with determination. Beneath it was the telephone, a black rotary with a long spiraled cord. When it rang, we all jumped. My mother would answer in her company voice, cradling the receiver between her ear and shoulder while stirring sauce with the other hand. Even the trash can had its story. It was tall metal with a foot pedal that squeaked and a lid that slammed. We lined it with brown paper bags before the days of plastic. The kitchen held everything. The hum of love in routine. The rhythm of chores that felt like care. The scent of cinnamon on Tuesday mornings. The sound of our childhood echoing in pots and spoons. It was where my brother announced he'd been accepted to college, where I sat on the floor after skinning my knee and Mom rubbed ointment on my leg, where Dad once danced with her just once after pouring her a second cup of coffee on a snowy day. Even now, in modern kitchens, with chrome and silence, I still miss the clatter, the human mess, the warmth not from an oven, but from her, from the way she moved, from the way the kitchen breathed with her in it. We left crumbs. We spilled milk. We argued and apologized, but we always came back to that table, because in that kitchen, everything made sense. Bedrooms in the 1950s weren't showrooms. They didn't match catalogs or photographs, but they were real, lived-in, creased, and quietly sacred. My room had wallpaper with tiny blue sailboats on a cream background, faded in the sun peeling near the windowsill. But I loved it. It was mine. Above my bed hung a wooden crucifix, and beside it a framed prayer embroidered by my aunt in pale thread now. I lay me down to sleep. The bed frame was metal painted white, squeaky with every shift. We slept on spring mattresses that sagged a bit in the middle, layered with cotton sheets tucked so tight they could hold a quarter bounce. Over them was a chenille bedspread, white with tufts that formed roses or swirls. In winter, we added a patchwork quilt my grandmother made, stitched with leftover cloth from dresses, aprons, and shirts. A story you could sleep under. My pillow wasn't memory foam. It was stuffed with feathers, prone to lumping in the corners, and carried the faint scent of lilac from drawer sachets. The pillowcase had my initials hand-stitched in pink by my mother's small flourishes of care that followed me into dreams. On my nightstand, a small alarm clock ticked with soft precision. It had two brass bells on top and a wind-up key in the back. The sound was steady, reassuring, like a heartbeat for the room. Sometimes I'd listen to it to fall asleep, the way city kids listen to traffic. Beside it was a reading lamp, short squat, with a green glass shade and a pull chain. I'd read Hardy Boys books under its yellow glow, or make shadow puppets against the wall until sleep took me mid-sentence. The closet held fewer clothes than any child's today, 3 or 4 shirts, one Sunday suit, a pair of corduroy pants that hissed as I walked. My shoes sat neatly underneath, brown leather, always polished by my father's hand on Saturday night. Shoe polish tins in black, and oxblood lived in a metal box by the door, next to a soft brush that smelled faintly of cedar. Above the closet was the storage shelf, home to old toys, a model airplane, and the Christmas wrapping paper we reused every year. I could only reach it by standing on the dresser, which I did often, always with a thrill of disobedience. The dresser itself was tall wood-grained laminate with curved metal handles that loosened over time. The top drawer was reserved for socks and underwear. The bottom one held out-of-season clothes and a jar of saved pennies. There was always a faint smell of starched lavender and something old I couldn't name. A mirror framed in matching wood sat atop it. I remember watching myself in it while trying to part my hair like Dad's, or making faces until I laughed too hard to stop. Sometimes when Mom combed my hair, I'd watch her eyes in the reflection. Focused, gentle, a little tired. The windows had curtains, not blinds. Thin cotton ones in summertime that danced with the breeze. In winter, we added heavier drapes drawn each evening to keep the cold from sneaking in. But I always left a small gap so I could see the stars. I believed if you could see them, they could see you back. Under the bed, I kept a shoebox of secrets, marbles, pressed, flowers, letters. I never sent a comic strip. I tore from the newspaper when Snoopy made me laugh too hard. Those boxes were the time capsules of childhood, hidden but always nearby. And sometimes, when I couldn't sleep, I'd listen through the thin walls. The creak of the hallway floor, the soft thud of the fridge closing, the murmur of my parents talking low the way people do when the world feels still. It was in that room I learned to whisper prayers, to dream in black and white, to count the days until summer and measure the distance between now and grown up. It wasn't just where I slept. It was where I imagined, where I waited, where I wondered who I might become. And when I dream now, decades later, my dreams still take place in that room, with the ticking clock, with the creaky bed, with the faint scent of dust and warmth and everything I once called mine. The bathroom in our house wasn't large, but it was full of ceremony. Every morning began in that tiled square, its walls dressed in soft pink ceramic with a black tile border, like a tidy ribbon near the ceiling. The floor was cold beneath bare feet, especially in winter when steam from the sink fogged the oval mirror above it. That mirror, rimmed in chrome, always had a streak in the corner, no matter how much Windex my mother used. The sink was porcelain and heavy, held by a pedestal that made cleaning a chore. It had twin faucets, one for hot, one for cold, and neither ever mixed quite right. You had to learn the rhythm splash from the hot, then cool it down, just so. The faucet squeaked when turned and dripped during the night, each droplet echoing like a slow clock. Atop the sink sat our soap dish, a pressed glass oval that caught water around the edges. Inside it, a slowly melting bar of ivory soap, always slightly curved from use, it scent clean and unmistakably home. We didn't have body washes or scented gels. We had ivory, and we had washcloths folded tight in the cupboard. The medicine cabinet was built into the wall and clicked shut with a magnet. Behind its mirrored door, a small bottle of rubbing alcohol, Vicks Vapo Rub, a tin of Noxzema, a pack of Band-Aids, a straight razor in a leather sleeve, and a roll of Tums my father chewed after Sunday supper. In a ceramic tumbler next to it stood our toothbrushes, plain-handled upright sharing space like old friends. The toothpaste came in a metal tube you had to roll from the bottom to squeeze out the last ribbon of mint. The bathtub was deep and white, its sides tall enough to feel like a swimming pool when we were small. A rubber bath mat with suction cups clung to the bottom, and over the side hung a washcloth stiff from drying. Our shampoo came in glass bottles and smelled faintly of flowers and something chemical. The shower curtain was plastic and printed with faded seashells, and it often clung to your legs when the heat rose too fast. Beside the tub, on a chrome rack, sat bottles of Calgon bath beads for Mom, tiny pastel orbs that melted into satin water on quiet Friday nights. That was her time, and we knew better than to knock. On the toilet tank, she kept a small basket of extra toilet paper rolls wrapped in pink paper, soft and thin, the kind you had to double up. The toilet seat itself was wooden, painted white, always cold and smooth. Next to it stood a plunger hidden behind the shower curtain, like a secret no one mentioned. The towel rack held neatly folded terry cloth towels, one pink, one blue, one green, depending on the day. Each one had our initials sewn in thread by Mom's careful hand. The towels were stiff when line-dried and summer soft when pulled from the indoor radiator in winter. The scent, always the same sun soap and thyme. High on the wall was a small frosted window, which opened outward with a crank handle. Through it came the morning sounds of birds, the smell of freshly cut grass, and sometimes in the distance, the bell of the milk truck turning the corner. There were bathroom rituals we followed without thinking. Turning on the hot tap before stepping on cold tile. Wiping the mirror with a dry towel after every shower. Folding our pajamas under the pillow before breakfast. Closing the lid after every flush because Mom insisted. Sometimes I'd sneak in just before bed and sit on the closed lid listening to the house settle. Pipes groaning, floorboards sighing, the faint familiar scent of talcum powder floating in the air like a lullaby. It wasn't a luxurious bathroom. It didn't sparkle or shine, but it was ours. And in its quiet corner, the day began and ended with care. It was the place where Dad shaved in the morning with a splash of Old Spice. Mom dabbed cold cream before bed. My sister braided her hair before church, and I counted tiles on the wall when I had the flu. Even now, when I walk into a modern bathroom, so sleek, so silent, I miss the squeak of those old faucets. I miss the scent of soap and the soft clatter of the toothbrush holder and the rustle of a curtain pulled back just so. Because that room didn't just clean us, it held the quiet of family and left us wrapped in warmth. It wasn't much more than a narrow space tucked behind the kitchen, a utility room with concrete floors and a single swinging bulb that hung from the ceiling like a quiet overseer. But to my mother, it was her workshop, her rhythm, her contribution to the order of things. The centerpiece was our washing machine, a white enamel Maytag with rounded edges and a lid that clanged when closed. It was top-loading loud and faithful. A steady groan and whir filled the room whenever it ran, as if the whole house was breathing a little deeper for the sake of cleanliness. And then there was the wringer, two hard rubber rollers above the wash tub. Dangerous if you weren't careful. My mother would feed the wet clothes through with practiced precision, turning the crank with one hand, guiding the fabric with the other. I remember watching fascinated as water poured out in streams and the cloth flattened between the rollers like pasta dough. Next to the washer was a deep utility sink stained with years of soap dirt and effort. Above it hung a bar of Fell's naphtha soap, yellow and square, tied in a piece of old pantyhose so it wouldn't slip away. That soap could conquer anything: grass stains, ink blood, even time. Mom would rub it into the collars of Dad's work shirts with such determination, like she was scrubbing away more than dirt. Beneath the shelves stood a metal hamper, dented and always half full. On its lid sat a clothespin basket, woven from plastic strips and stuffed with wooden pins, each one stained by sun and storm. They clicked against each other like wind chimes when carried outside. Laundry was a full-body act, then not a button you pushed and forgot. It meant sorting, soaking, scrubbing, and then, if weather allowed, hanging. Out back, stretched between two rusted poles, was our clothesline. Every Monday, like clockwork, white sheets would bloom on it like sails. Shirts danced, towels flapped, and pillowcases twisted slowly in the breeze. I would stand beneath them, feeling the cool, damp drop from corners, catching the scent of soap and open sky. There was a right way to hang things: socks in pairs toes down, shirts by the hem to avoid shoulder marks, towels folded once pinned at the crease. My mother moved with quiet purpose, lips pursed, apron flapping behind her like a flag of domestic grace. She'd sometimes hum a tune from the radio, Patsy Cline or Patty Page, while shaking out a sheet with a practiced snap that filled the yard like thunder. In winter, when line drying wasn't possible, she'd stretch laundry on wooden racks in the living room or basement. The smell of drying fabric mixed with the scent of stew and firewood. Clothes would take longer to dry, but they absorbed the house, its rhythm, its warmth. The ironing board, always folded neatly beside the door, was covered in a checkered cloth worn thin from years of steam. The iron was heavy metal and didn't have a fancy steam button. Mom kept a sprinkle bottle, an old Coca-Cola glass bottle with a perforated cap to dampen stubborn wrinkles. She'd spritz press smooth fold, over and over, each shirt a small triumph. And how she folded t-shirts creased just so. Sheets into squares so perfect they seemed cut by ruler. Dad's handkerchiefs folded into tiny envelopes of care. We didn't have baskets with wheels or scented dryer sheets. We had wire laundry carts, squeaky and reliable. We had line-dried linens that smelled of earth and wind. And most of all, we had hands. Hands that scrubbed. Hands that wrung. Hands that hung and folded and ironed and restored. Sometimes I helped fumbling pins and stepping on wet hems. Sometimes I just watched leaning against the doorframe, learning that love could look like folding a shirt for the 100th time. The laundry room wasn't pretty. It wasn't decorated, but it was full of quiet devotion. And every time I crawl into a bed made with crisp sheets or open a drawer to the soft scent of cotton and memory, I remember that little room where labor met love beneath a single swinging light bulb. It was the smallest room in the house, but to us it felt enormous. Because in that room, the walls weren't boundaries. They were backdrops to worlds we built with our hands, our voices, our imaginations. Our beds were twin size and pushed against opposite walls, leaving just enough space for a game of marbles or a wrestling match that ended with a scolding from the hallway. The headboards were wooden, painted white, nicked and chipped from years of bedtime book drops and pillow fights. Between the beds sat a shared nightstand, often cluttered with comic books, crumpled tissues, and the occasional forbidden candy wrapper. On it stood a lamp shaped like a rocket, its red plastic base glowing when switched on. It didn't cast much light, but it made us feel brave at night. Lined along the baseboards were the toys that didn't make it back into their boxes. There were tin soldiers painted in chipped green forever at attention. A wind-up robot with a key on its back and stiff legs that clicked as it walked. Wooden blocks, their letters worn from years of spelling half-words. A yarn-haired doll, missing one shoe, but still carried each night with devotion. And then there was the toy chest, an old wooden crate with brass hinges and a lid that squeaked. Inside, a red rubber ball, soft from use, a jump rope with frayed handles, a plastic cowboy hat that once belonged to Roy Rogers in my dreams, broken yo-yos, puzzle pieces, jacks, and marbles, smooth as glass planets. We didn't need batteries. We didn't need screens. We had imagination, and it was enough. Above the beds were simple shelves. One held picture books and hardback fairy tales passed down from cousins. The other held a piggy bank shaped like a dog, a snow globe from Niagara Falls, and a mason jar half full of fireflies, which we swore we'd release, eventually. The dresser was short and squat, with mismatched knobs and a wobbly leg. Inside, clothes were folded unevenly, play shirts in one drawer, pajamas in another. Our Sunday best was hung in the closet, always slightly musty and covered with tissue paper from the dry cleaner. At the back of the closet, we kept our secret stash comic books hidden behind shoeboxes, drawings. No one was allowed to see a Viewmaster, with slides of faraway places like Niagara Falls and the Grand Canyon. On the windowsill stood our treasures: a pine cone from the state park, a rock shaped like a heart, a paper airplane that once flew across the living room and was never flown again because it had flown perfectly. At night, we'd lie under cotton blankets and quilts stitched by our grandmother. We'd whisper across the room, "Did you hear that? Want to trade lunch tomorrow?" If you had 3 wishes, what would you pick? The ceiling light had a glass dome with a pull chain, and it buzzed faintly when it was on. But once the room dimmed and the moonlight poured in through the curtains, everything softened. Even the toys looked different, quieter, older waiting. Sometimes Mom would come in to check on us, smoothing a blanket, kissing a forehead, whispering, "Go to sleep now." Sometimes we'd pretend to sleep just to hear the sound of her slippers fading down the hall. That room saw scraped knees and chicken pox. It saw birthday balloons tied to bedposts. It heard giggles, confessions, and the secret telling of ghost stories. It was the room where we first imagined our futures and where we dreamed our most magical pasts. And when I pass a child's room now, perfect and curated shelves lit by LEDs, toys that speak, beds with themes, I smile. But I also remember the quiet world we had. No batteries, no apps, just a drawer full of crayons, a floor full of dreams, and a brother to whisper to until we both fell asleep mid-sentence. The garage smelled like the past. Not just any past, Dad's past. It was his world separate from Mom's kitchen, or our bedrooms full of noise and toys. It was half workshop, half sanctuary. A place where tools spoke louder than words, and every item had its place eventually. The garage door creaked like an old man's knees when it opened. It was heavy wooden paneled and had to be lifted by hand with a grunt and a heave. No automatic openers, just elbow grease and a firm tug on the metal handle. Inside, light filtered through narrow windows, throwing long beams across dust motes dancing in the air. Against the back wall stood Dad's workbench, crafted from thick lumber, scarred and stained with varnish, oil, and time. Above it, a pegboard stretched like a shrine, with tools hanging on nails in shapes we all came to recognize: crescent wrench, flathead screwdriver, needle nose pliers, the hammer with the worn hickory handle and the crack at the base. Each had its silhouette outlined in black marker so you'd always know if one went missing. Below the bench were old coffee cans filled with nails and screws, each sorted by size and purpose. There was an entire drawer of washers, and no one ever knew what they were for, but Dad did, and that was enough. On the shelf above the bench sat his radio, an old General Electric AM unit with a cracked dial and a bent antenna. He kept it tuned to the local station that played ball games and news. On Saturdays, it hummed faintly behind the sound of a handsaw or the steady tap of a hammer. I can still hear it, and Mantle steps up to the plate. Crack the ball game echoing over the scent of motor oil and cut pine. The floor was cluttered but navigable. Tires stacked in the corner. A red gas can with a metal spout that clanged when you tipped it. A cardboard box of extension cords so tangled Dad joked they were practicing to become snakes. And in the far corner, under a green tarp, sat his pride, a lawnmower manual, push heavy as a boulder. He kept the blades sharp himself, with a file he said belonged to his father. Every Saturday morning, the hum of that mower was the town's alarm clock. Windows opened, dogs barked. The neighborhood knew the day had begun. There was a vise bolted to the bench where he'd clamp odd things, pipes, wooden toys. We broke sometimes even a pencil just to sharpen it with care. That vice held more than tools. It held quiet moments. Dad didn't talk much in the garage, but he listened. Sometimes he'd let me hand him tools. 3/8 socket, he'd say, and I'd rummage through the metal box with the peeling red paint triumphant when I found the right one. Good eye, he'd say. That was all. But it meant the world. Against the far wall hung bicycle tires, rope and old fishing rod, and a set of snow chains we never used but kept just in case. There was a box of license plates, one from every car he ever owned. He called it history. We called it clutter. I see now that we were both right. In the rafters, he'd stored old paint cans, baby cribs, and a sled whose runners had rusted but still held the memory of a hill in 1954. You couldn't throw things out, not in the garage. They were too full of story. When something broke in the house, a chair leg, a cabinet hinge, a door latch, we knew where it would end up on the bench under his lamp between his calloused hands. And the next day, it would be fixed, quietly, reliably. The garage wasn't warm, it wasn't neat, but it was his. And in its stillness, it told you who he was. A man who believed in fixing, in saving, in doing it himself even when no one noticed. I visit garages now, so sterile and clean, with floor paint that gleams and toolboxes you're afraid to touch. They don't smell like oil. They don't have radios. They don't whisper the low hum of someone working for the ones he loves. But sometimes, in quiet moments, I'll hear the faint crackle of an AM station. And I'll remember the garage, the bench, the sound of a wrench hitting wood, and the love that was built bolt by bolt in the corner of a dusty room. It sat just outside the house, gleaming in the sunlight or glistening in the rain. Our car part, machine part member of the family. It was a 1955 Chevrolet Bel Air, two-tone turquoise and white, with sweeping chrome that curved like laughter down its sides. Dad kept it spotless. Every Saturday he'd wash and wax it with a worn cloth and a bucket of suds. He didn't just clean the car, he honored it. Because that car wasn't just transportation, it was freedom. The bench seats inside were wide enough for 3 kids or 2 adults and a picnic basket. The upholstery was vinyl cool in winter, blistering hot in summer. But it smelled like something timeless, a mixture of motor oil leather polish and the mint from Mom's gum. The dashboard was a symphony of mid-century optimism, chrome dials, rounded gauges, and a speedometer that arched like a rainbow. There were no seatbelts, just trust. The kind that made us bounce with every pothole and laugh when we slid side to side on corners. The steering wheel was massive, thin, and smooth. It had a horn in the center that let out a proud honk. Not the timid chirp of today's horns, but a declaration. When Dad honked to a neighbor, it was as if the whole town turned to wave. Mom always kept a tissue box on the dash, usually in a crocheted cozy. The glove compartment held treasures, gas station maps with towns circled, a flashlight with weak batteries, a half-used book of S&H green stamps, receipts from diners in towns we couldn't pronounce, and one lipstick coral pink that Mom forgot about but never threw away. We had sun visors that didn't really block the sunwing windows. You could angle for a breeze, and hand crank windows that we argued over constantly. Down just a little more, no too much. And then there was the radio, AM only, sometimes static. But when it found a station, oh, the magic it brought. Elvis crooning from Memphis, Patsy Cline spinning heartbreak in the heat, news updates with that clipped, serious tone, and the occasional ball game crackly distant yet perfect. We'd drive to the store, the Lake Church nowhere, because sometimes nowhere was the point. Long before GPS, Dad would pull over to unfold a paper map, elbows on the hood finger, tracing roads like lines in a story. The trunk was enormous. It held a picnic blanket, a tire iron and jack, an emergency jug of water, a kite that never flew. And in summer, our bathing suits rolled in towels warm from the sun. Sometimes we'd lie in the back seat on long drives, heads against each other, watching telephone poles flick by in rhythm like a lullaby in motion. The wind would whistle through the cracked windows. The sun would stripe our faces, and we'd listen to our parents talk in soft voices up front about things we half understood but fully trusted. And in that car, everything felt possible. Dad once told me as we cruised down a back road, you can learn more about life on a long drive than from any book. I didn't get it then. I do now. Because it was in that car I first saw autumn unfold in a blur of orange and gold, where I cried quietly after a lost baseball game, where I kissed a girl on the cheek in the back seat after church, where my brother told me he was leaving for the army, where Mom sang off-key but proud to every song that came on. That car didn't just take us places. It held us together, even when the muffler rattled and the brakes squeaked, even when it stalled in winter and smoked in summer. It was ours, faithful, familiar, a moving memory. And now, when I see a restored Bel Air at a car show, polished and perfect, I smile. But I miss the dents, the scratches, the smudges on the windows from sticky fingers and summer sweat. Because to me, the beauty of that car wasn't in its shine. It was in its stories, in the journeys, in the way it carried our family forward, mile by mile, song by song. You didn't go into the attic unless you had a reason. And even then, you tiptoed. Because in our house, the attic wasn't just a storage space, it was a vault of time. The entrance was hidden in the hallway ceiling, a square door with a dangling cord. When you pulled it, a creaky wooden ladder unfolded, steps groaning like the bones of an old man waking from sleep. And with each careful climb upward, the air grew cooler, quieter, older. The attic was unfinished rafters, exposed floorboards, narrow insulation, peeking from corners like fragile cotton candy. But every object up there held its breath. And when you entered, it felt like you had walked into someone else's dream. There were trunks big and heavy with tarnished locks. Inside, faded letters tied with ribbon. Photographs in black and white edges curled with age. A wedding veil wrapped in tissue. Baby shoes no larger than your palm. A diary with a lock still clasped. I once opened a box marked Christmas expecting ornaments. Instead, I found my grandfather's old Santa suit, worn thin at the elbows, with bits of fake beard still tangled in the collar. It smelled like cinnamon and mothballs and December. Another box held old toys. A wooden horse missing a wheel, a porcelain doll with a cracked face, a set of Lincoln logs wrapped in twine. They felt foreign yet familiar, like cousins you'd never met but heard stories about. There were books, their spines stiff and dusty, with names handwritten on the inside covers to James Christmas 1942. There were yearbooks from schools that no longer existed, Newspapers announcing wars ended, and presidents elected board games missing half their pieces. But it wasn't just the things, it was the silence, the kind of silence that hums with echoes. Where the light from the one small attic window drifted in like memory itself, soft, slanted, and golden. Dust floated in its beam, like time slowed down, refusing to settle. In the far corner was an old rocking chair, its seat sunken, its arms rubbed smooth. No one remembered how it got there. No one ever moved it. But I used to sit in it quietly and imagine things what my father looked like at 5. Whether my mother had secret dreams she never told us. What the house sounded like in the 1930s. Sometimes I'd find myself reading old postcards from strangers I never knew. Weather is fine. Miss you terribly. Yours always, M. It was like reading whispers. Once I found a radio boxy and quiet its cloth speaker torn. I dusted it off, plugged it in, and waited. Nothing. But I swear I mean it. I heard something. Faint, like a Sinatra song stuck in the wood. The attic wasn't just a storage space. It was the home's memory, and it held the memories we forgot to carry with us. It held our before. I wonder if every home has a place like that. A quiet corner where time doesn't tick, it breathes. Where things wait to be remembered, not because they're important, but because they were real. Even now, decades later, I sometimes close my eyes and return to that space. I feel the wooden floor under my feet. I hear the creak of a box opening. I see a photograph of a girl who looks like my sister smiling in a dress I never knew she wore. And I remember that no object is just a thing. A spoon, a letter, a blanket, a lamp, they're vessels. And in the attic, they are never alone. They wait, just like memories do. Every room, every corner, every object, alive, with the quiet love that shaped us. The house is gone now, not gone as in vanished, but changed. New paint, new owners, new sounds. But somewhere beneath the renovations and redecorations, the bones remember. I passed by it recently. The porch swing was gone, but I could still hear it creak, and I imagined the screen door slapping shut as my brother ran inside breathless from a summer game. People say houses are wood and nails. I disagree. Our house was made of radio songs, laundry, steam bicycle wheels, bedtime whispers, Sunday coffee, laughter behind closed doors, and the quiet, faithful objects that held us in place. And when we left, we didn't just take boxes. We took memories shaped like spatulas, record players, doilies, and dolls. We took warmth, and some part of us never really left at all.